The night the deal was struck, the wind carried the smell of dust and old whiskey across the valley, and the lanterns in the stockyard burned low as if they knew something heavy was about to pass from one soul to another. Folks would later say that was the night a man tried to sell what little goodness he had left, and another man bought more than he ever planned to carry. The rancher stood apart from the noise, boots planted in the dirt, hands rough and scarred from years of fences and frost. He had lived alone so long that silence felt like a second skin. Yet that night, silence was broken by a quiet figure standing behind a shaking man with a bottle clenched in his fist. The father's words came slurred and sharp, cutting through the cold air. He spoke of debts, of bad luck, of cards that never fell his way. He spoke as if the girl behind him were just another thing worn thin by hard times. She did not speak at all. Her eyes stayed lowered, lashes dark against pale skin, hands folded tight in front of her. Everyone in town knew she was deaf. They said she had been that way since childhood, ever since a fever nearly took her life. Some pitied her. Others barely noticed her at all. In a place where survival came before kindness, weakness was often ignored. The rancher had not come to town looking for trouble or charity. He had come for feed and wire, and maybe a word with the blacksmith if time allowed. He had no wife waiting at home, no children to hurry back to. His ranch sat lonely against the wide plains, a place of creaking boards and open skies. He had learned to live with that loneliness, to let it settle into his bones like winter cold. Still, when he saw the girl standing there, thin shoulders hunched beneath a borrowed coat, something shifted inside him that he did not yet understand. The father pushed a folded paper into the rancher's hands. It was a crude agreement, written in uneven ink, saying the girl would work in exchange for food, shelter, and a small sum paid up front. It was the kind of paper men used when they had nothing else to bargain with. The rancher read it slowly, jaw tight. He did not like the word sold, even if no one said it out loud. He did not like the way the father swayed, or the way the girl flinched when the bottle struck the man's leg. He told himself he was doing the practical thing. The ranch needed help. A second pair of hands, even limited ones, could make a difference through the long seasons. He told himself it was better she work his land than be passed from place to place by men who cared even less. With a stiff nod, he counted out the money. The father grabbed it fast, already turning toward the saloon lights. He did not look back. The girl stayed where she was until the rancher gently motioned for her to follow. She watched his hands closely, reading his movements the way she had learned to read the world. On the ride back she sat straight in the wagon, eyes wide as the plains stretched out before them. The night sky arched high and endless, stars scattered like promises no one dared to claim. The rancher wondered what promises she had been given and which ones had been broken. Life on the ranch settled into a quiet rhythm. The girl rose early, copying the rancher's movements as best she could. She swept, carried water, fed the chickens, and learned the paths between barn and house. The rancher spoke little, assuming his words were wasted. He showed her things instead, pointing, guiding, sometimes correcting with a gentle hand. She worked hard, harder than he expected, never complaining. When she smiled, it was small and rare, but it carried a light that softened the rough edges of the place. At night, the rancher sat alone at the table, listening to the wind move through the grass outside. The girl ate with him, quiet as ever. He found himself watching her more than his plate. She noticed everything: a dropped fork, a shadow crossing the window, the distant thunder long before the storm arrived. He told himself she was simply observant, a skill sharpened by silence. Days turned into weeks. The rancher began to feel the weight of another presence in his home. It was not a burden. It was a reminder that he was not as alone as he had believed. Sometimes he caught her humming softly to herself, a sound without tune, just a vibration in her chest. He wondered if she felt the world through sound in ways he could not imagine. The first moment that unsettled him came one afternoon in the barn. A board slipped from the loft above, crashing down behind her. She turned before it hit the ground, eyes flashing toward the sound, body already moving away. The rancher froze. He told himself it was coincidence, that she must have sensed the movement. Still, his heart beat harder than it should have. After that he noticed more. The way her head tilted when the coyotes cried at night. The way she flinched when a distant gunshot echoed across the plains. Once, he spoke her name softly behind her, not expecting a reaction. She paused, just for a breath, before continuing her work. That pause lingered in his mind like an unanswered question. The rancher wrestled with his thoughts in the quiet hours before dawn. Had the town been wrong about her all this time? Had her father lied, or had something changed? He did not want to believe he had been fooled. He also did not want to believe she had been hiding something from him. The paper they had signed weighed on him now, heavier than before. He had thought he was offering safety. What if he had taken something else without knowing? One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, a rider appeared on the far edge of the land. The girl saw the dust plume first. She stiffened, eyes fixed on the distance, breath shallow. The rancher followed her gaze, unease crawling up his spine. The rider moved with purpose, straight toward the house. The rancher stood, heart pounding, as questions crowded his mind. Who was coming, and why? What part of the girl's past was catching up with them now? He glanced at her, and for the first time she met his eyes fully. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. A plea, a warning. As the rider drew closer, the rancher realized the truth might shatter the simple story he had told himself from the start. He had bought help for his ranch, or so he believed. But the land, the girl, and his own lonely heart were tangled in something far deeper. And whatever was riding toward them carried the power to change everything they had begun to build, leaving the question hanging in the evening air, unanswered and impossible to ignore. The rider did not slow as he crossed the fence line. The horse's hooves struck the hard earth with a steady rhythm that carried across the open land. The rancher felt it in his chest before the sound reached his ears. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of the girl without thinking. She stayed close behind him, fingers brushing the back of his coat, light as a question she was afraid to ask. When the rider finally pulled up, dust swirled around them, hanging in the air like a warning. The man in the saddle wore a dark coat, worn thin at the elbows, and his eyes moved quickly over the ranch house, the barn, the fences. He noticed everything. His gaze lingered on the girl for just a moment too long before returning to the rancher. The rider spoke, his voice calm but edged with something sharp. He asked simple questions. How long had the rancher lived out here? Whether business was good? If anyone else worked the land? The rancher answered carefully, offering nothing more than needed. He did not mention the paper, the deal, or the town whispers. The girl stood very still, head lowered again, but her breathing had changed. The rancher felt it, felt the tension ripple through her. The rider said he was passing through, looking for someone. He did not say who. He tipped his hat, eyes narrowing slightly as if measuring the space between truth and lies. Then he turned his horse and rode off the way he came, leaving silence behind him like a closed door. The rancher did not move until the rider was gone from sight. Only then did he turn to the girl. She was pale now, lips pressed tight. He wanted to ask her what frightened her, wanted to know if the man was tied to her father, or to something else she had never told him, but he did not know how to begin. Words felt clumsy between them, heavier than usual. That night, sleep would not come easy. The rancher lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of the land, the creak of the house, the distant cry of an owl, the wind brushing against the walls. He became aware of the girl moving in the other room, soft footsteps, a chair shifting. When a board outside popped under the change in temperature, she stilled at the same moment he did. His eyes opened in the dark, heart pounding. Memories surfaced then, things he had pushed aside. The way she reacted to sound. The way her head turned when he spoke too loudly near her. The pause when he had spoken her name. He wondered if her father had truly believed she could not hear, or if it had been easier to claim she was broken than to face what she understood. The next morning, the rancher rode into town alone. He told the girl to stay close to the house, to keep the door barred if anyone came. She nodded, but her eyes followed him until he disappeared down the trail. Once in town, he felt eyes on him. The place was small and news traveled fast. He stopped by the store, then the stable, listening more than talking. A man near the counter mentioned a rider asking questions the day before. Another said he had heard rumors about a girl who had gone missing from the edge of town months back. The rancher kept his face blank, but his hands tightened around the reins. He paid and left, unease settling deeper with every step. On the ride home, he wondered what he had stepped into. He had thought his life was simple: land, work, solitude. Now there were secrets riding across his fields and a girl who might hear every word he spoke. He did not know whether that thought frightened him or gave him hope. When he returned, the girl was waiting on the porch. She stood quickly when she saw him, relief plain on her face. He felt a strange warmth at that, a reminder that someone now watched for his return. He checked the locks, the barn, the perimeter of the land. Nothing was out of place. Still, the air felt different, charged. That evening, as they worked side by side preparing supper, he spoke aloud, more to himself than to her. He talked about the weather, about the crops, about a fence that needed mending. He watched her closely. She kept her eyes down, but there were moments when her movements lined up too perfectly with his words. When he said hot, she wiped her brow. When he said careful, she slowed her steps. He stopped suddenly and faced her. The silence stretched between them. Slowly, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers once. The sound was sharp in the small room. The girl did not turn, but her shoulders tightened. Just enough. His breath caught. He did not push further, not yet. Instead, he softened his posture, stepping back. He did not want to frighten her. Whatever the truth was, it had likely been a shield for her, a way to survive a world that did not care to listen. That night, a storm rolled in without warning. Thunder cracked across the sky, loud and close. The girl cried out, a sound torn from her chest before she could stop it. She clapped her hands over her ears, eyes wide with shock and fear. The rancher rushed to her side, steadying her, his mind racing. There was no denying it now. She could hear. When the storm passed, they sat in silence, the truth heavy between them. The rancher wanted to ask why she had hidden it, wanted to know what danger followed her like a shadow. But he also understood fear. He had lived with his own kind for years. In the days that followed, the rider returned to the edge of the land, never crossing it, always watching. Sometimes another horse appeared beside him. The rancher felt the walls closing in. He sharpened his tools, checked his rifle, kept the lanterns lit longer at night. The girl stayed close, her eyes tracking every sound now, without pretending otherwise when she forgot herself. Once she tried to speak, her mouth opening as if to form words she had not used in years. Then she stopped, shaking her head, tears bright in her eyes. The rancher did not force it. He placed a cup of water in her hands, grounding them both. Whatever she carried from her past was not ready to be spoken. Whatever the rider wanted had not yet been taken. The rancher sensed that the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be enough to keep them safe. The days grew tighter after the storm, as if the land itself had drawn a line and dared the trouble to cross it. The rancher felt it in small things. The horses spooked more easily. The chickens scattered at shadows. Even the wind seemed to pause before rattling the windows, like it was listening first. He moved through his chores with a watchful eye, always aware of where the girl stood, where she might run if she had to. She changed after that night. Not in a way that was loud or sudden, but in quiet shifts that told a deeper story. She no longer pretended not to hear when a door creaked or a tool dropped. Sometimes she caught herself reacting and froze, eyes darting to the rancher to see if he noticed. He always did. Yet he never said a word. He let her keep what control she had left. The space between them filled with unspoken understanding. He spoke less now, choosing his words carefully, knowing she might hear every one of them. When he did speak, his voice stayed low and steady, not commanding, not accusing. He wanted her to know she was safe, even if he was no longer sure that was true. At night, he sat on the porch with a lantern and a cup of coffee gone cold, watching the dark. The girl often sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, knees drawn up. She listened to the world in a way that seemed new to her, as if she was both afraid of sound and hungry for it. Once, a coyote cried out close to the fence line. She jumped, then slowly relaxed, her face softening with something close to wonder. He began to piece together fragments of her past from small clues, the way she flinched at raised voices, the way her eyes followed men in town with wary precision. The way her hands trembled when she smelled strong drink. Whatever her father had been, he had not been gentle. Whatever lie had been told about her hearing, it had likely kept her from worse harm. Trouble did not stay at the edge of the land for long. One afternoon, while the rancher was repairing a fence near the creek, he saw two riders instead of one. They stopped short of the property line, talking among themselves. One laughed, a sound that carried too easily. The rancher straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers, making sure they saw him watching. The girl stood near the barn, pretending to stack wood. Her head lifted slightly at the sound of voices, her posture stiff. The rancher raised a hand, a small signal meant only for her. Stay. She hesitated, then obeyed, though fear flickered across her face. The riders did not cross the line. They turned away after a while, dust rising behind them. But the message was clear. Someone was testing boundaries. Someone believed the girl belonged to them, or that she knew something worth chasing. That night, the rancher rode into town again, this time under cover of darkness. He visited an older man who had lived in the area longer than most. Over weak coffee and a low fire, he asked careful questions about strangers, about deals made in back rooms, about a drunk who might have owed more than money. The answers were half-truths and uneasy silences. There had been talk of a man who ran errands for worse men farther west. There had been a girl who heard too much in places where secrets were currency. Someone had decided it was safer if she could not hear at all. The rancher listened, jaw clenched, anger building slow and steady. On the ride home, the weight of responsibility pressed down on him. He had not meant to take on another person's war. He had wanted quiet, land, and the simple honesty of hard work. Yet here he was, standing between danger and a girl who trusted him more than anyone ever had. The girl waited for him, just inside the door. She did not sleep until she heard his horse return. When he stepped inside, she rushed forward before she could stop herself. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders, grounding them both. In that moment, he understood that whatever came next, he would not turn away. She tried again to speak that night. Her lips trembled as she shaped a word that came out broken and soft. It was his name, spoken like it might vanish if she said it too loudly. He swallowed hard, nodding, encouraging her. She pressed a hand to her chest, then pointed toward the dark window, shaking her head. Fear, warning, memory all tangled together. Days passed with no clear move from their watchers, which only deepened the tension. The rancher began preparing in quiet ways. He cached supplies. He mapped escape routes through the hills. He taught the girl how to load a rifle, not to use it, but to know it. Knowledge, he believed, was its own kind of protection. From her side, the world felt like a tightening circle. She listened constantly now, to footsteps that were not there, to the creak of the house settling, to voices she remembered from long ago echoing in her mind. She had learned to survive by being invisible, by letting people believe what suited them. Pretending not to hear had saved her once. Now it might get her killed. Sometimes she stood at the edge of the field, staring toward the horizon where the riders had appeared. She wondered if running would spare the rancher, or if it would only bring the danger faster. The land had become her shelter, the rancher her anchor. Leaving felt like tearing herself apart. One evening, a stranger came to the door. Not a rider this time, but a woman from town, face lined by worry. She spoke in a low voice, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being seen. She said there were men asking questions again. Offering money, making threats that were not spoken aloud. She urged the rancher to be careful. After she left, the rancher barred the door and leaned against it, eyes closed. He felt the weight of every choice pressing in on him. The girl stood nearby, listening to his breath, to the way it caught when he exhaled. She reached out, taking his hand in both of hers. It was a simple gesture, but it steadied him more than any plan. Outside, the wind rose, carrying distant sounds across the plains, hooves, voices. The rancher lifted his head, every sense alert. He did not know if the night would pass quietly or break into chaos. All he knew was that silence was no longer their shield. As the lantern burned low and shadows stretched long across the walls, the rancher and the girl stood together, waiting. Whatever truth she carried, whatever men were coming for it, the reckoning was drawing closer. And when it arrived, it would test not just the land they stood on, but the fragile trust that had grown between two lonely souls who had never meant to collide. The night finally came when waiting was no longer possible. The air felt heavy from the moment the sun dipped low, as if the land itself knew what was approaching. The rancher moved through the house in steady silence, checking the shutters, the lamps, the back door. Each small sound carried farther than it should have. The girl followed him closely, her steps careful, her eyes alert. She no longer tried to hide what she could hear. There was no point now. He caught her watching him as he loaded supplies into a sack: water, bread, a blanket. Not to flee, but to endure. She touched his arm, stopping him for a moment. When she spoke, the words came slow and rough, shaped by a voice unused to sound. She tried to explain, hands moving as much as her mouth. Pieces fell into place. Men who traded secrets, a room behind a bar. Her father drinking while voices rose around him. She had heard names, numbers, plans that were never meant for her ears. When they realized she could hear, the lie was born, and the lie became her shield. The rancher listened without interrupting, anger burning behind his eyes. Not at her, never at her, but at the men who had treated a child like loose change. He understood now why they were circling back. She was not property to them. She was a risk. Before dawn he led her out to the barn. The horses shifted nervously as if they sensed the coming storm. He saddled one horse only, leaving the other loose inside. He pointed to the hills beyond the creek, a narrow path hidden by brush. He told her if things went bad, she was to take that path and not look back. She shook her head, fierce and silent. Her fingers tightened around his sleeve. Leaving him was not an option she could accept. As the sky lightened, the first rider appeared. Then another. Then more, spreading out as they crossed the landline without stopping this time. The rancher stepped out into the open, rifle resting at his side, not raised. He wanted them to see him clearly. He wanted them to know he was not afraid, even if fear pulsed hard in his chest. The men approached slow, confident. One spoke, voice smooth, practiced. He said they were there to settle unfinished business. He claimed the girl belonged to debts unpaid and promises broken. The rancher replied just as calmly that no one belonged to anyone. The land between them felt tight as wire. Behind the rancher, the girl listened to every word. Her heart pounded, but her mind stayed sharp. She recognized one of the voices, the man who had laughed in that back room. The one who thought silence could be bought. She stepped forward before the rancher could stop her. Gasps rippled through the men when she spoke, clear and steady despite the strain. She told them she remembered everything. She told them running would only make it worse. The men reacted fast, shouts, movement, one reached for his belt. The rancher raised his rifle then, not firing, but making his line clear. The air felt ready to break. In that moment, a sound cut through the tension, hoofs from behind. The rancher's eyes flicked toward the road. Riders from town approached, led by the older man he had spoken to nights before. Word had traveled. Courage had followed it. The balance shifted, but the danger did not fade. Voices rose, accusations thrown back and forth. The girl stood her ground, hands trembling but voice holding. She was done being invisible. She was done being sold, hidden, silenced. The rancher stood beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence like a wall at her back. Time stretched thin, every breath felt loud. The men realized too late that the land had turned against them. They backed away slowly, threats muttered, eyes promising this was not over. The rancher did not answer. He watched until they were gone from sight, dust settling where they had stood. When the last sound faded, the girl's strength finally gave. She swayed, and the rancher caught her, holding her upright as the weight of the moment crashed down. The town rider stayed long enough to make sure the land was secure, long enough to let the message sink in. Then they left, one by one, leaving the ranch quiet again. The quiet felt different now. Not empty, not lonely, but full. The girl sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind move through the grass without fear. The rancher sat beside her, exhaustion settling into his bones. Neither spoke for a long while. Words felt small compared to what had passed between them. As the sun climbed higher, warmth spread across the land. The girl leaned her head against his shoulder, tentative at first, then certain. He did not move away. He knew the road ahead would not be simple. There would be questions, healing, a life to rebuild piece by piece. But the worst of the storm had gathered and broken, and they were still standing. In the distance, the plain stretched wide and open, holding the promise of a future neither of them had dared imagine. The rancher looked out across his land, no longer just his, and felt something close to peace. The girl closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of a place that had finally become home. The days that followed carried a strange calm, like the quiet after a long illness when the body is still weak but the worst has passed. The rancher woke each morning expecting trouble to return with the sun, but it did not. No riders appeared at the fence line, no shadows moved where they should not be. The land slowly settled back into itself, and so did he. The girl slept deeply for the first time since coming to the ranch. When she woke, she no longer startled at every sound. She listened instead, learning which noises meant safety and which ones were only part of the living land. Birds at dawn, wind through dry grass, the steady creak of the barn door. These sounds became familiar friends rather than threats. Word from town came quietly. The men who had been asking questions had moved on. Some had left the region altogether. Others found that people were suddenly less willing to do business with them. Secrets, once dragged into the light, had a way of losing their power. The older man from town stopped by once, hat in hand, and told the rancher that the matter was finished. The girl would not be bothered again. The rancher listened, nodded, and felt a weight lift that he had not realized he was still carrying. When the man left, he stood for a long while looking out across the fields. The land looked the same as it always had, but he felt different standing on it now. Less like a lone keeper and more like someone building something meant to last. Life found a new rhythm. The girl began to speak more, slowly, carefully, choosing words like fragile tools she was still learning to use. Sometimes her voice cracked, and she laughed at herself, surprised by the sound. The rancher never rushed her. He listened the way he had learned she always listened to the world, with patience and attention. She told him pieces of her past when she was ready. About nights spent hiding under tables while men talked too loudly. About pretending not to hear insults that cut deeper than any blow. About the days she realized silence could protect her better than truth. The rancher listened without judgment. He did not offer excuses for her father or anyone else. He let her pain be what it was. In return, he shared parts of himself he had long kept buried, a family lost to sickness, a house that had once been loud with laughter before it went quiet. Years spent believing solitude was easier than hope. The girl listened, her eyes soft, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They found comfort in knowing neither of them was alone in their scars. As spring pushed deeper into the land, the ranch began to change. Repairs that had been put off were finally done. New fence posts stood straight against the horizon. A small garden took root beside the house, green and stubborn. The girl tended it with care, humming softly as she worked. The sound carried across the yard, warm and steady. People from town began to visit more often. Not out of curiosity, but out of respect. They brought supplies, news, and sometimes just conversation. The girl no longer shrank from their presence. She stood beside the rancher, head high, hearing every word and choosing when to answer. Her confidence grew in quiet ways like the slow strengthening of a healed bone. One afternoon, the rancher surprised her with a simple gift, a small slate and chalk. He told her she could write when words failed her voice. Her eyes filled with tears as she traced her first careful letters. It was another door opening, another way to be heard. She wrote her name, then his, side by side. He smiled, a rare, full smile that reached his eyes. The question of the paper, the agreement signed in desperation, lingered between them for a time. One evening, the rancher took it from the drawer where it had been hidden since the beginning. He read it once more, then held it out to her. She looked at it, then back at him, confusion giving way to understanding. He tore it cleanly in half and dropped the pieces into the fire. The past burned away without ceremony. From that day on, she stayed because she chose to, not because anyone said she had to. The ranch became her home in truth, not just in name. She learned the land as well as he did, its moods and seasons. She learned to ride, awkward at first, then laughing as confidence took hold. The rancher watched her and felt pride bloom where loneliness once lived. Summer came full and bright. Evenings were spent on the porch, sharing simple meals and stories. Sometimes they spoke of the future, cautiously at first, then with growing certainty. Plans for expanding the ranch, ideas for bringing more life to the land. The girl talked about helping other children who had been silenced the way she once was. The rancher listened, seeing a purpose forming that stretched beyond fences and fields. The bond between them deepened, not rushed, not forced. It grew from shared work, shared fear, and shared trust. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, the girl reached for his hand. This time there was no hesitation. He squeezed back, grounding them both in the moment. When autumn arrived, it brought with it a sense of completion. The land yielded its harvest. The house felt warmer, fuller. Laughter came easier now, echoing off the walls that had once known only silence. The girl's voice grew stronger with each passing week, no longer afraid to take up space in the world. One day, a letter arrived from town, offering the girl a chance to attend a small school that welcomed those who learned differently. She read it slowly, then looked at the rancher, uncertainty flickering across her face. He told her the choice was hers. The land would be here whether she went or stayed. She smiled, folded the letter, and placed it on the table. She would go, she decided, but she would always come back. Watching her ride out weeks later, confident and sure, the rancher felt something close to awe. He had not saved her, he realized. She had saved herself. He had only given her space to do it. When she returned, taller somehow, brighter, the ranch welcomed her home. They stood together at the edge of the fields, looking out at a future built not on fear or silence, but on truth and choice. The lonely ranch was lonely no more. And the girl who had once been sold as if she were nothing now stood as proof that even the quietest voices, when finally heard, could change everything.